B.F. Skinner did not offer a personality theory that can be easily contrasted and compared with the others we've discussed. In fact, he did not offer a personality theory at all, nor did his research deal specifically with personality. His work attempted to account for all behavior, not just personality, in factual, descriptive terms. Skinner argued that psychologists must restrict their investigations to facts, to only what they can see, manipulate, and measure in the laboratory. That meant an exclusive emphasis on the overt responses a subject makes and nothing more. Skinner's contention was that psychology is the science of behavior, of what an organism does. In explaining personality, most other theorists look inside the person for clues. The causes, motives, and drives, the forces that direct our development and behavior, which originate within each of us. In contrast, Skinner made no reference to internal subjective states to account for behavior. Unconscious influences, defense mechanisms, traits, and other driving forces cannot be seen, he argued, and therefore they have no place in a scientific psychology. They have no more value for science than the old theological concept of the soul. Skinner did not deny the existence of internal forces, only their usefulness for science. Another way Skinner differed from other theorists is in his choice of experimental subjects. Some personality theorists focus on emotionally disturbed persons, others on normal or average individuals. At least one, Abraham Maslow, based his theory on the best and brightest people. Although Skinner's ideas about behavior have been applied to people, the research for his behavioral approach used rats and pigeons. Despite Skinner's focus on studying animal behavior, his work has had wide practical applications for changing human behavior. Techniques such as behavior therapy, derived from his research, are used in clinical settings to treat a variety of disorders. His behavior modification techniques are also widely used in schools, businesses, correctional institutions, and hospitals. During the 1920s and 1930s, while Freud, Adler, and Jung were relying on clinical practice, and before Eysenck was using psychometric procedures to build personality theories, a number of behaviorists were constructing models based on laboratory studies of humans and animals. Early behaviorists included E.L. Thorndike and J.B. Watson, but the most influential of the later behaviorists was B.F. Skinner. Behavioral models of personality avoided speculations about hypothetical constructs and concentrated almost exclusively on observable behavior. Skinner rejected the notion of free will and emphasized the importance and primacy of environmental influences on behavior. Skinner's approach to behavior, simple in concept, is based on thousands of hours of well-controlled research. His fundamental idea is that behavior can be controlled by its consequences, that is, by what follows the behavior. Skinner believed that an animal or human could be trained to perform virtually any act, and that the type of reinforcement that followed the behavior would be responsible for determining it. This means that whoever controls the reinforcers has the power to control human behavior, in the same way an experimenter can control the behavior of a laboratory rat. Behavior analysis minimized speculation, focused on observable behavior, asserted that behavior is lawfully determined, and asserted that behavior is the product of environmental stimuli. B.F. Skinner was born in Susquehanna, Pennsylvania in 1904, the older of two sons, but his brother died at the age of 16. His parents were hard-working people who constantly dictated to him clear rules of proper behavior. Skinner's grandmother made certain that he understood the punishments of hell by pointing out the red-hot coals in the parlor stove. Skinner's father contributed to his son's moral education by teaching him what happens to criminals. He showed Skinner the county jail and took him to a lecture about what life was like in a notorious New York State prison. In his autobiography, Skinner made many references to the impact of these childhood warnings on his adult behavior. He wrote of visiting a cathedral as an adult and taking care to avoid stepping on the gravestones set in the floor. As a child, he had been told time and time again that such behavior wasn't proper. These kinds of experiences made it clear to Skinner that his adult behaviors had been determined by the rewards and punishments, or the reinforcements, he had received as a child. Thus, his system of psychology and his view of people as complex systems behaving in lawful ways clearly reflected his own early life experiences. He attended Hamilton College, earning a BA, but while in college, as an undergraduate, he wanted to be a writer. But after having little success in this endeavor, he turned to psychology. After earning a PhD from Harvard, he taught at the universities of Minnesota and Indiana before returning to Harvard. Skinner published his first book, The Behavior of Organisms, in 1938. During his career, he also invented the controversial and well-publicized baby tender. Baby tender was a box built for his daughter Debbie, which was designed to help provide mothers with more free time. Some people saw it as a Skinner box, similar to the ones he used for his experiments with rats and pigeons, and there were rumors that Debbie's time in the tender caused her emotional problems and eventually to commit suicide. Now, this was not true. In fact, she grew up fine. The baby tender involved putting Debbie in a laboratory box for a few hours a day, in which all of her needs were met. During his career, Skinner trained pigeons to guide bombs into enemy ships in World War II, which he demonstrated in 1944. He eventually realized his early ambition of becoming a writer when he wrote Walden 2, which was published in 1948. It was his utopian vision for enhancing social justice and human well-being. Skinner died in 1990 of leukemia. Skinner believed that human behavior, like any other natural phenomena, is subject to the laws of science, and that psychologists should not attribute inner motivations to it. Although he rejected internal states, such as thoughts, emotions, and desires, as being outside the realm of science, Skinner did not deny their existence. He simply insisted that they should not be used to explain behavior. Skinner acknowledged there are unconscious processes and heredity or genetic effects, but he said we cannot do anything about our genes, so we need to look at other influences on behavior. What is interesting is Freud and Skinner are often seen as complete opposites. This is not true. They actually had many things in common. Skinner was very interested in psychoanalysis and wanted to be analyzed, but Freud turned him down. Skinner was actually influenced by Freud for many years. Because the purpose of science is to predict and control, Skinner argued that psychologists should be concerned with determining the conditions under which human behavior occurs. By discovering these conditions, psychologists can predict and control human behavior. Skinner held that science has three principal characteristics. Its findings are cumulative. It rests on an attitude that values empirical observation, and it searches for order and reliable relationships. Skinner recognized two kinds of conditioning, classical and operant. In classical conditioning, a conditioned stimulus is paired with an unconditioned stimulus until it is capable of bringing about a previously unconditioned response. You may remember Pavlov's famous experiments with his salivating dog and the bell. Later, Watson conditioned an infant to fear a white rat, the conditioned stimulus, by associating it to a loud, sudden noise, the unconditioned stimulus. Eventually, through the process of generalization, the boy, little Albert, learned to fear stimuli, such as a Santa Claus beard and a soft white rabbit that resembled the white rat. Skinner was most interested in operant conditioning. With operant conditioning, reinforcement is used to increase the probability that a given behavior will recur. Three factors are essential in operant conditioning: the antecedent or environment in which the behavior takes place, the behavior or response, and the consequence that follows the behavior. Psychologists and others use shaping to mold complex behavior. It's a procedure in which the experimenter or the environment first rewards gross approximations of the behavior, then closer approximations, and finally the desired behavior itself. Through the reinforcement of successive approximations, the experimenter finally shapes the final set of complex behaviors. Let's say a teacher is trying to teach Johnny to speak in front of the whole classroom. Given that Johnny is a very shy kid, he wouldn't be able to give a whole speech right away. So instead of promising Johnny some reward for giving a speech, rewards should be given to behaviors that come close, like giving him a reward when he stands in front of the class. Next, when he goes in front of the class and says hello. Then, when he can read a passage from a book. And finally, when he can give a whole speech. The whole point is for rewards to be successive. In this way, shaping of behavior can occur. Now let's look at the kinds of reinforcement that can occur. Anything within the environment that strengthens a behavior is called a reinforcer. A positive reinforcer is any stimulus that, when added to a situation, increases the probability that a given behavior will occur. A negative reinforcer is any unpleasant condition that, when removed from a situation, also increases the probability that a given behavior will occur. Now, positive and negative reinforcers are often confused. Just remember, a positive reinforcer is added to a situation, and a negative reinforcer is an unpleasant condition that is removed. And both positive and negative reinforcement strengthen behavior. Any event that decreases the occurrence of a behavior, either by presenting an aversive stimulus or by removing a positive one, is called punishment. An example could be taking away internet time from a child. The effects of punishment are much less predictable than those of reward. Both punishment and reinforcement occur from either natural consequences or from human manipulation. Now, primary reinforcers are stimuli that are by their nature satisfying. Conditioned reinforcers are learned by being paired with other reinforcers. Conditioned reinforcers are those stimuli that are not by nature satisfying, for example, money, but that can become so because they are associated with a primary reinforcer, such as food. Generalized reinforcers are conditioned reinforcers that have become associated with several primary reinforcers. Money, again, is a good example here of a generalized conditioned reinforcer. Cash can be exchanged for food and a lot of other pleasant goods and services. Reinforcement can follow behavior on either a continuous schedule or on an intermittent schedule. Many of our behaviors are on an intermittent schedule, also called a partial reinforcement schedule. These schedules refer to the fact that our behaviors are reinforced only some of the time. These partial or intermittent schedules are important because they are more resistant to extinction than continuous reinforcement. There's also a video in this week's module to help explain this. There are 4 schedules of partial or intermittent reinforcement. Fixed ratio schedules are those where a response is reinforced only after a specified number of responses. This schedule produces a high, steady rate of responding with only a brief pause after the delivery of the reinforcer. An example of a fixed ratio schedule would be delivering a food pellet to a rat after it presses a bar 5 times. Variable ratio schedules occur when a response is reinforced after an unpredictable number of responses. This schedule creates a high, steady rate of responding. Gambling and lottery games are good examples of a reward based on a variable ratio schedule. In a lab setting, this might involve delivering food pellets to a rat after 1 bar press, again after 4 bar presses, and a third pellet after 2 bar presses. Fixed interval schedules are those where the first response is rewarded only after a specified amount of time has elapsed. This schedule causes high amounts of responding near the end of the interval, but much slower responding after immediately getting the reinforcer. An example of this in a lab setting would be reinforcing a rat with a lab pellet for the first bar press after a 30-second interval has elapsed. A variable interval reinforcement schedule is when a response is rewarded after an unpredictable amount of time has passed. This schedule produces a slow, steady rate of response. An example of this would be delivering a food pellet to a rat after the first bar press following a 1-minute interval, another pellet for the first response following a 5-minute interval, and a third food pellet for the first response following a 3-minute interval. The tendency of a previously acquired response to become progressively weakened upon non-reinforcement is called extinction. Such elimination or weakening of a response is called classical extinction in a classical conditioning model, and operant extinction when the response is acquired through operant conditioning. Skinner believed that human behavior is shaped by three forces: natural selection, the evolution of cultures, and the individual's personal history of reinforcement, which we just discussed as a reinforcement schedule. In terms of natural selection, as a species, our behavior is shaped by the contingencies of survival. That is, those behaviors, such as sex and aggression, that were beneficial to the human species tended to survive, whereas those that did not tended to drop out. Looking at cultural evolution, those societies that evolved certain cultural practices like tool-making and language tended to survive. Currently, the lives of nearly all people are shaped in part by modern tools like computers, the media, various modes of transportation, and the like, and by their use of language. However, humans do not make cooperative decisions to do what is best for their society, but those societies whose members behave in a cooperative manner tended to survive. Skinner recognized the existence of such inner states as drives and self-awareness, but he rejected the notion that they can explain behavior. To Skinner, drives refer to the effects of deprivation and satiation or satisfaction, and thus are related to the probability of certain behaviors, but they are not the causes of behaviors. Skinner believed that emotions can be accounted for by survival needs and the contingencies of reinforcement, but like drives, they do not cause behavior. Similarly, purpose and intention are not causes of behavior, although they are felt sensations and exist within the body. Human behavior is subject to the same principles of operant conditioning as simple animal behavior, but it is much more complex and difficult to predict or control. Skinner explained creativity as the result of random or accidental behaviors that just happen to be rewarded. Skinner believed that most of our behavior is unconscious or automatic, and that not thinking about certain experiences is reinforcing. Skinner viewed dreams as covert and symbolic forms of behavior that are subject to the same contingencies of reinforcement as any other behavior. Social behavior is also subject to reinforcement and punishment. Ultimately, all human behavior is controlled by the environment. Societies exercise control over their members through laws, rules, and customs. There are four basic methods of social control, according to Skinner: operant conditioning, including positive and negative reinforcement and punishment; describing contingencies, or using language to inform people of the consequences of their behaviors; deprivation and satiation, techniques that increase the likelihood that people will behave in a certain way; and physical restraint, including the jailing of criminals. Although Skinner denied the existence of free will, he did recognize that people manipulate variables within their own environment and thus exercise some measure of self-control. Skinner was not a psychotherapist, and he even criticized psychotherapy as being one of the major obstacles to a scientific study of human behavior. Nevertheless, others have used operant conditioning principles to shape behavior in a therapeutic setting. Behavioral therapists play an active role in the treatment process, using behavior modification techniques and pointing out the positive consequences of some behaviors and the aversive effects of others. Skinner's ideas on operant conditioning have generated a lot of research. Much of this research can be divided into two questions. How does operant conditioning affect personality? And how does personality affect conditioning? In addition to these two questions, a recent development in research due to advances in technology has been the study of reinforcement as related to brain activation. Many studies have demonstrated that operant conditioning can change personality, or that is, behavior. For example, one study found that when given a choice, smokers would choose a cigarette rather than money. How personality affects conditioning. Research has also found that different personalities may react differently to the same environmental stimuli. This means that the same reinforcement strategies will not have the same effect on all people. For example, Philip Core conducted one of the first studies to examine differences in anxiety and impulsivity and their association to responses. His results showed people vary in their responses to reinforcers depending on their personality. Recent advances in imaging have allowed researchers to analyze individual differences in brain activation as a response to stimuli such as food. Using functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, John Beaver and his colleagues gave the Behavioral Activation Scale self-report to participants to measure how actively they tend to pursue rewards. They then measured the subject's brain activation upon exposure to pictures of rewarding foods versus bland foods. They found that people who scored higher on the personality variable of behavioral activation also had greater activation to pictures of rewarding foods in 5 specific areas of the brain. These results supported the general conclusion that personality is related to differences in how we biologically respond to rewards. This research holds future promise for possibly helping to alter health outcomes, such as obesity, and for understanding what people find rewarding and why. As a critique of Skinner on the 6 criteria of a useful theory, Skinner's work rates very high on its ability to generate research and to guide action, high on its ability to be falsified, and about average on its ability to organize knowledge. In addition, it rates very high on internal consistency, and it is difficult to rate on simplicity. Skinner's concept of humanity is a completely deterministic and causal one that emphasizes unconscious behavior and the uniqueness of each person's history of reinforcement within a mostly social environment. Unlike many determinists, Skinner was quite optimistic in his view of humanity, and his behavioral principles have improved the lives of many. For much of his career, Skinner was quite optimistic about the power of behavioral science to solve the major problems facing humanity. However, near the end of his life, he revealed he had become somewhat pessimistic about our species.